Welcome back everybody to another Quest Marker review. Today I want to talk about a game I've had in my backlog for a pretty long time. It initially caught my eye all those months ago because it looked like some kind of new or different Dungeons & Dragons experience, and I'm all about rolling those polyhedral dice. So if you heard about the Warlock of Firetop Mountain, the Warlock of Firetop Mountain, or the Warlock as I'm going to be calling it in this review, is developed by the Australian company Tin Man Games and published in the summer of 2016, but its foundations reach way farther back in time. Warlock was one of the originators of the Choose Your Own Adventure novel, originally published in 1982, and this was the time of advanced Dungeons & Dragons. And I'm pointing that out because that's really the kind of story and experience you're going to get. Warlock, the game, is a recreation of Warlock the Choose Your Own Adventure novel. The game opens with the hero adventurer beginning their quest, and the game is presented to you through a large board game-esque style, with little miniatures thumping along tiles and panoramas. I enjoyed the style because I thought it was both a novel depiction and also gave a sense of immersion and made you feel that you were at your buddy's house late at night, staring down at that dungeon board with all your little miniatures out, and you were trying to smite a beholder while your buddies are eating Cheetos and drinking Mountain Dew. The way dungeon tiles form and manifest based on the paths you take, and rooms get created right before your eyes based on the decisions that you make, and as you move deeper into the mountain, the scope of your quest expands and grows, and I think this creative style works really well, and it's enhanced by the retro style concept art that flashes up in front of you when you get to a particular scene, monster, or character. And this helps foster the feeling of the dungeon and flushes out Firetop Mountain, because if we had to solely rely on the miniatures, some of the scenes would really fall flat. The depiction of the Iron Cyclops, for example, is much more menacing than the plasticky thing that we fight. There are 3 types of encounters you'll experience on your journey, and these basically form up the content of the game. You have story decisions, tests of luck and skill, and combat. So we're first going to start off with that narrative design, the choices that you make, the characters that you pick, and what it feels like to engage with Warlock's story. I think, to sum up neatly, A Song of Fire and Ice, written by George R.R. Martin, came out in 1996, but Warlock is a story from 1982, and it's now 2019. I think our expectations and the caliber of storytelling we expect from video games isn't the same anymore, or even what we expect from the fantasy genre across all visual or interactive media. Warlock's story is very much filled with all the archetypal tropes, which have really become stereotypes at this point. There's an orc barracks, a nest of spiders, an ancient dwarven hall, there's a lot of goblins, and then there's a maze, and then there's even more orcs, and of course there has to be a few skeletons and a creepy undead castle, a demon trapped in a mirror, even more orcs and goblins, and we interact with all of these creatures and locales in that would-be stereotypical adventure kind of way. There's not a lot of depth or complexity or even really memorable characters to Warlock's story, and regardless of what character you pick, the major narrative beats do unfold in a similar manner. The story, again and again, is just about navigating a dungeon to find the Warlock Zagor and to thwart him. And that's fine, I guess. This is a recreation of a 1982 fighting fantasy paperback. I don't think complex characters or intriguing plotlines are necessarily the objective of Warlock. But to me, that's why the story didn't really jive super well. Perhaps the biggest narrative draw is the small impact and influences that character selection has in the game. You start off with 4 characters to choose from, and you unlock more via each playthrough of the game. Over the course of my approximate 4 hours with Warlock, I played as Kreia de Tura, Aaron Gotspeed, Lunica Akkadi, and Alexandra of Blacksand. Each character brings with some new snippets of dialogue, some more than others, but also they all come within a unique individual quest that alters your progression through the Firetop Mountain. Aaron Gotspeed, for example, wants you to vanquish the Minotaur, whereas Kreia wants you to smite the demon in the mirror, but Alexandra wants you to get the Eye of the Cyclops. Some of the character quests alter how you progress through Firetop Mountain, but some are more naturally completed as you just move through the linear sections of the game than others. Additionally, each character does have varying stats and stamina, luck, and skill, but more importantly, they have unique traits, which have much more influence, like educated or illiterate, that do affect how you maneuver through the world and interact in certain scenes. But there is still a lot of linearity here. You have to move through the orc barracks. You're going to encounter the same rooms. You have to move through the domain of the dead. You still have to cross that river at a certain point in the game. A lot of the options sometimes boil down to like yes or no triggers. But there's also an abundance of dead ends and turning about and nothing really happened, or you get 2 gold pieces, or it was a trap. The layers of decision making in Warlock weren't really as deep as I was expecting going into this game. The second type of encounter we can cover briefly. This is your test of luck or skill, and this boils down all non-combat encounters, opening a chest, pulling a lever, running across a collapsing bridge. And so how does Warlock handle this? Just a simple dice roll. Random number generation, RNG. That's okay, right? We can have a bit of that in there. I mean, D&D has polyhedral dice. But the problem is that the third type of encounter, combat, is still largely guided by RNG, but in a bad way. You zoom into a dungeon board and you move your character about, employing their variety of attacks. To some extent, positioning is important in Warlock and understanding the attack patterns of your opponents. But there's still a discomfort I felt the more and more I played, because sure, you can learn an attack pattern and movement in the best way to go about fighting a certain foe. But when you clash with an enemy, which is inevitable, it's going to just be your dice roll versus theirs. There isn't a whole lot of choice in this. It literally comes down to, did you get a higher number? And there's really not a whole lot you can do about it. There's no way you can adapt or change or prepare or plan. There's always going to be these combat encounters, and because of how the story influences the combat, you're recreating the same fight like every time. The way you progress through Warlock will always invite combat, and just really the only difference is how much you're going to deal with. I'm going to be honest, whenever I'm playing a game with a strong narrative component that's central to the game, what really makes or breaks a lot of the game for me is whether I care about the characters and to a lesser extent the plot. So while I can appreciate some of the clever I got that disguise back in room A of the dungeon, which lets me get past this guard here, but could get me attacked by my would-be ally, it didn't really hit the mark for me, because I don't really have a vested interest in the success. And I was still going along in the bumbly, stereotypical let's fight some orcs and goblins story. And a lot of this is exacerbated because the majority of Firetop Mountain stays the same from each playthrough, and a lot of the choices are really the same. There's some randomness, there's some procedural generation, but it's dwarfed by reaching that same T-junction, finding that same drunk orc, the same locked door, and that same pair of goblins at the nest of spiders. So when I hit my 4th playthrough with Alexandra of Blacksand, to me, I felt like I had seen a lot of what the mountain had to offer already, and I was clicking through with fatigue of been there, done that, which wasn't really fun or engaging. So overall, the Warlock of Firetop Mountain receives a neutral positive if score from me. To be honest, I think there's a good deal of polish in this interesting title, and I think it's interesting, but for me it was way more interesting than it was fun. I think I've grown past this kind of classic dungeon romping, goblin slaying, maniacal warlock kind of fantasy. But for those of you out there who want to revisit this old school style, this game is right for you. Or if you really like choose your own adventure novels, this will be right up your alley. But for me, I'm not really wanting to leave the cozy comforts of the town of Anvil to once again try to thwart Zagar deep in the Firetop Mountain.